Thank you, Doc Aldo and D'Angelo for kind introduction. Magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. It's nice to be informed that we have quite a good number of participants this afternoon. We have colleagues from the industry, representatives from government, from the academe, and of course, there are also those who wish to venture into broilers. I just hope that I'll be able to enlighten you at the end of this presentation this afternoon. And thank you for attending. The Philippine broiler industry is at the crossroads. Challenges are in every facet of broiler production. The necessity to manage our costs in producing this commodity now requires closer scrutiny in order to attain our desired returns. Before we go over to the present broiler cost structure, let's look back at how broiler efficiencies have evolved the last 25 years. This will give us an idea or understanding of what we can expect moving forward. Two basic parameters: feed conversion, or more commonly known as FCR, which is the total feeds consumed divided by the total kilos harvested, and average live weight, or ALW, computed as the total kilos harvested over the total birds harvested. These guide not only industry players in improving their efficiencies, but also our other partners in the industry, like the breeders, feed producers. In simple terms, it's basically the amount of feed that we can convert into meat. At the right half of the slide, as you see, is a numerical illustration showing how broiler efficiencies evolved as a response to increasing demand for chicken meat. These data are based on US broiler efficiencies. To make it a little clearer, I decided to insert the local efficiencies in 1990 and 2010 to emphasize comparison. Note how we lagged during the late 80s to early 90s, when broiler contract growing in the Philippines was just starting to expand. But we were able to catch up from year 2000. Because one good thing, it was during this time that the climate-controlled housing, some people may term it as CCS or maybe panel ventilation. Anyway, principles are the same. This was the time when this type of housing was introduced, and it was a complete game changer in our local broiler production. These significant improvements in broiler production did not just happen. There were advancements in genetic selection, breakthroughs in nutrition, and innovations in housing. These are the main factors which made all this possible. However, there were also trade-offs in the process, like fast-growing birds getting less resistant to challenges and of all sorts, and their digestive system now more sensitive to feed quality. In short, there was now a need for more TLC, or what we call tender loving care. I prepared a simple outline to guide you this afternoon. My focus will be on commercial broiler production costs, because it is here where I can better correlate costs with efficiency. Although some details, like those on labor and utility costs, are also applicable to broiler contract growing. Let's move to broiler production costs. Broiler production cost. This is the present cost to produce in broilers based on industry acceptable efficiencies, meaning that is both for integrators and commercial raisers, which stands, in my computations, at 88.14 pesos. This can actually adjust depending on how we manage the other correlated costs shown. Although this may not be our entire objective, it is not necessarily the ideal one. So it's worth mentioning that not all farms at this point are 100% efficient. So it simply means that as we add these farms into the equation, we expect it to be a way higher, way above 88 pesos. We're not sure, maybe reaching 100 or more. I say way higher because majority of these costs are exponential in nature. Costs which come on a per head basis, that is from day-old chick, operating expense, medication, vaccination, rent, amortization, and administrative expense, were converted to per kilo by adding harvest recovery into the equation. This is how costs accumulate from daily mortalities and are taken into consideration. The last column, which exhibits the percentage share of each cost component to total cost, shows how much feeds contribute in broiler production. In this case, 61.55%, or 2/3 of total cost in general. As with costs related to day-old chicks, wild swings in chick prices ranging to a high of 48 pesos per head, which happened just recently or within the last year or two, to as low as 10 pesos, all depending on demand and supply situations, can adjust values considerably. So if you apply those wild swings, maybe for day-old chick, from 16.37 per kilo, it can go up to 26 pesos. Then if you're a bit lucky to be able to purchase those cheap chicks, which go as low as 10 pesos, maybe you can lower the old chick to around 6 to 7 pesos per kilo. Now, reading down the line, you have the day-old chick at 18.57%, operating expense 7.3%, medication and vaccination 3.31%, rent, amortization, and administrative expense, which I consider as fixed cost, come to 7.95 and 1.32% respectively, or for a total of 100%. Let's go to factors affecting broiler production costs. First, for feed costs. Feeds can either be sourced from commercial feed millers or they can be mixed by us. Both have their own advantages and disadvantages. Now, let me explain them separately. In choosing a commercial feed supplier, what do we need to consider? Well, in my experience, making a research as to which commercial feed miller produces the most efficient feed in terms of feed conversion and average live weight is most important to me. Price is only secondary since damage done by cheap feeds or inefficient feeds exponentially outweigh any amount you may want to save. In simple terms, it's garbage in, garbage out. Then you need to check flexibility. Will these feed millers allow inclusion of additives, even at our own expense? Why do I say this is necessary? For one, these feed millers might not be able to guarantee performance, although they don't have the intention to do anything that would be of effect to performance of our birds. But because of external factors, maybe ranging from bad weather, some raw materials which are unfit to be used, some additives may be necessary, maybe double dosing, more of binders. In every case, we need to check, we need to be able to adapt and adjust as needed. Also, we have to consider physical quality. As we know, less energy is needed by broilers when they consume good quality pellets as compared to those with less. Commercial broiler producers, on the other hand, who mix their own feeds, it's the same criteria that we need to consider. Although, for people who mix their feeds, like me, I find more flexibility this time. One is in the choice of raw materials, since because of the volume, I mean, a small volume we need to mix, it's easier for me to acquire the best raw materials. It's different from, it's different for feed millers who need to buy their raw materials in bulk. Sometimes they get to overlook things that, well, things that need to be considered, no? Because of the need for their, what you call stocking inventory, they might just have to bring in some raw materials which are not actually supposed to be brought in. Also, when you mix your own feeds, you get to maximize the genetic potential of the breed through your production of high quality feeds. You may get higher feed costs because of the need for maybe higher density feeds. But then broiler producers understand that attaining a better FCR, better live weight, can easily offset these high costs. It's also easier to conduct trials in raw material availability. Let's consider the present situation. Now, the challenges in the cost of raw materials, it's just so high that a lot are doing their own trials just to be able to, should we say, satisfy the nutritional needs of their broilers. They do adjustments in formulations, like for coconut oil, some already resort to mixing palm oil with coconut oil just so they can reduce costs of energy. We also have high costs of soybean meal, some sort to adding additional DDGS, and similar situations for corn and additions to wheat. These quality ingredients may be accessible for feed millers like me because of the size. Now, it's true that we get savings by mixing our feeds ourselves. But in my case, I might have a different view compared to the other broiler producers who do self-mix. It may depend on some market issues. Like, there are commercial broilers who have a market for, say, 1.5 to 1.8 kilo birds. In this case, they may not require high density feeds because of the weight requirement. In my case, where I need to raise birds higher than 1.8, I might have to resort to high density feeds. these are some limitations that people who resort to, broiler producers who resort to commercial feeds cannot easily do. Let's move on to factors affecting broiler production cost when it comes to day-old chicks. In choosing good quality day-old chicks, these are the things that I think needs to be considered. Supplier, breed, and hatchery. Just as with choosing a reliable feed miller to supply your feeds, we also need research on day-old chick suppliers, which is of utmost importance. We wouldn't want to entrust our high-quality feed, which is actually the biggest contributor to cost, as shown earlier, to a poor and inefficient carrier in the form of day-old chick. Of course, suppliers may not be consistent in their produce, but reliable suppliers may have lesser issues concerning chick quality on the average. For the choice of breed, in our case, this may not be as difficult since there are only a few to consider. Right now, we have Cub, and I think Ross, although for the owners of Ross, they may have others like Indian River. It's quite limited. However, I think you might want to do trials just the same to check with feed and management which may be compatible to the breeds available in the market. Not because we're dealing with the same, say, bird, commonly known as broilers. We cannot say that nutritional specs will be the same for each breed. Simply because there are breeds that are bred based on the need for big birds, and there are also those breeds that are bred for small birds. Although initially they may have the same requirements, but when it comes to weights going more than 1.5, 1.6, all the way up to 2.5 to 3 kilos, differences will be noticed already. We have to remember also that these broiler breeds are not always dominated by one particular breed, meaning Cub may dominate it in the next 3 years, but we cannot actually say what comes in the next 3 years. We know of challenges, we know the weakness of a broiler, so anything can just come up. So it's always advisable that we do trials on some other breeds. This is very common to integrators. Continuous genetic selection of these breeders can always change the preference of broiler producers from time to time. Now, for hatchery, we know a chick supplier, because of its volume, its market, and its breeder farm locations, will have different hatchery sites, possibly with different machines as well. Now, depending on the technicians and machine performance in a particular site, chick quality may also vary. Of course, we see hatchery management as a factor at this point. So, it's also good practice to segregate and note hatchery sources coming from the same supplier. We need data gathering. At this point, hatchery suppliers are, I don't say, since these are suppliers, these suppliers would want feedbacks from their customers also. So it's better that they get informed of any data that you might have. So if we talk of issues regarding hatchery-related concerns, it's better that we have data which maybe can help us in our decisions later on. Do we retain the same supplier or do we retain the same breed? Now, assuming there are no hatchery problems, there's also the choice of a convenient location for a hatchery, because this can contribute to a trouble-free brooding, meaning chicks that will have a shorter travel time coming from the hatchery will have a faster access to feed and water after chick hatch, which is actually necessary in attaining a good chick start. We go to operating expenses. Factors affecting broiler production cost as caused by operating expenses. Managing modern day broilers need attention to more detail compared to those 20 years ago. As such, there is a need for a specialized team of farm hands to do this. Electricians, for instance, are needed 24/7 and should be trained on how modern equipments like digital generator sets, automatic switches operate, and the consequences that go with it in case these machines fail. It's also true that the ratio between flock hands, these are the people who are directly involved tending the birds, those who provide the feeds, provide the water, medication. It's true that flock hands between closed and open housing are now higher compared to before, which results in labor savings. Well, that's the common, the most logical when you go to tunnel housing or climate-controlled housing, what a flock man can tend before. I think this time he can do more. However, there are additional labor in the form of these skills which now needs to be budgeted to avoid costly incidents. In the case I mentioned, the need for qualified electricians. And we all very know that salaries of skilled people like this are a lot higher compared to just ordinary labor. Since the introduction of closed housing, it's worth recalling how costly these incidents have happened, ranging from huge penalties being charged by integrators to their growers. Contract growers are familiar with this, to total farm devastation. When I say devastation, whole family, whole farm, I mean, being completely wiped out because of fire. So we can just imagine how these risks related to broiler farming have also developed. Aside from the more common that we normally anticipate, like diseases, feed problems, the cost of utilities. We know this is a major factor in contract growing operations. This will have to increase due to the need for better ventilation. As the age to grow a bird decreases, we expect more heat expelled by the broilers. So as they grow faster, in layman's terms, their body becomes warmer. So this should be addressed either by adding additional equipment or simply extending their operating time. So meaning, instead of putting sensors at automatic, some during summer, well, like me, I extend operation of my fans, some reaching as high as 18 hours, some even 24 hours, depending on the heat. Also, to maximize the benefits of this increase in cost, air leakages must be checked regularly. And this can be accompanied by gadgets like now we have those wind speed tracking devices. It's not as expensive, so I don't think it's not wise. It's not wise to be able to get one of these. Vaccine and medication. Vaccine and medication programs normally depend on farm conditions or the environment where farms are located. For integrators, for instance, recommendation of programs come from their team of veterinarians, while for commercial growers, it will all depend on the owner themselves. Why do I say this? Because based on their previous grow, they might have the experience of what's effective or not. And maybe they can also seek advice from their consultants if they are maintaining one. What is actually important here is strict monitoring and data gathering, which may help in analyzing future cases. Vaccines, for instance, that may be effective today may no longer be after several cycles. This is why variants are now a common part of a vaccination program. The monitoring of antibiotic resistance. This has been a norm ever since, but should never be neglected. Instead, more in-depth details are necessary to avoid making wrong prognosis that can lead to expensive double dosing expenses. Let us also not forget to anticipate weather patterns. We can do this by stocking on stress-reducing water solubles before those periods of challenge. For broilers, this is common during the third quarter. Now, let me emphasize that climate-controlled housing doesn't all the time mean resistance to weather challenge. This is a common argument for investors who are planning to venture into broiler farming. They all say that they're now resistant to weather, so they don't mind what weather is what weather do we have outside. Some do not even mind external weather challenges like typhoons. When we talk of significant fixed costs, we refer to costs or investments that need to be considered either on a short or long-term basis. Rentals, for example, can either be on a per cycle, monthly, or annual. Well, comparing that to new constructions, long-term fixed costs may be at least, well, may take at least 5 years to recover. Before making any conclusions, let me share one table, which is what we call the Broiler Performance Index. This table, I know integrators have a way of computing this, no? But for me, I've limited it to 3 parameters: the average live weight, the harvest recovery, and FCR. What I understand is some integrators even include average day of harvest because, of course, they need to compare performance of growers among themselves. In this case, you notice the highlighted rows. As with the table I showed earlier, the acceptable performances right now is based on a weight of 1.8, a recovery of 95, and an FCR of 155. So with this, you come up with an index of 110.3. Now, why did I highlight the second one? Weight of 2.04, harvest recovery of 95, FCR of 155, index of 125. This is actually a data coming from friends who say they have set this index as their basis. Because of price swings, I think it will, well, according to them, it's safer to make your own computations with this index. So, basing it on what they say, the likelihood that you lose money when you have this performance index of 125 will be less likely. So, I just showed you continuous computation just to give you an idea of how indices improve. Now, the last two highlighted rows showing a decrease in harvest recovery and an increase in FCR, you come up with an index also above what they say is the safe index that we need to attain. So it's but proper to make your own conclusions that in this case, it's really the average live weight that matter. Simply because we know for a fact that in broilers, there are instances when FCR is no longer moving, but average live weight is still increasing. Now, for my conclusions, the broiler industry is presently in uncharted territory. Global disruptions in logistics, oil production, and as we speak, the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I wasn't actually expecting this when I made this text. They all are taking a toll in our poultry and livestock industry. Not to mention natural calamities caused by climate change. Now, as to how long, we hope not, these problems will persist. Not even highly productive nations would be able to predict. That said, we still have perennial advancements in every segment of broiler production, particularly in genetics, nutrition, and housing design. What's important is we just have to continuously adapt with the changing landscape of the industry and the costs that go with it. These are additional production costs that are necessary in implementing changes to significantly improve our production. The need to provide modified equipments to provide better ventilation and address the growing need of fast-growing birds, like applying vaccines in ovo or post-pellet add-ons. These are all designed to provide exponential benefits. It is necessary to understand how these costs evolve, why and when to implement, which costs to be eliminated. Because at the end of the day, efficiency will be key, and this will decide who will stay as a broiler farmer. Thank you. That ends my presentation.